Hello and welcome back to my channel. So honestly, April started out really slowly and I did not expect it to be high quantity reading month, but some months aren't and that's totally fine. But the second half of the month, I don't even know what happened, but somehow things picked up and somehow I managed to read 11 books in total in April. So 11 books for a total of 3,329 pages. The longest book I read was 416 pages, and that was Say You'll Remember Me by Abby Jimenez. And the shortest book I read was 240 pages, and that was The Jumbies by Tracy Baptiste. I have noticed most of this year so far, we're 5 months in, I have been reading overall much shorter books than I usually do. And at first I was like, I don't know how I feel about that because I'm like, what does that mean? What does that say about me? And then I was like, you know what? It says nothing about me. It says that's what I've been reading. I find it so interesting the way that my reading just ebbs and flows depending on the season and the time of life, how busy I am, my mood, and all of these things. And I think that there is a tendency, and I know I've definitely noticed this in myself, especially, I'd like to think that I've come a long way, but especially when I was younger, but I obviously still have that a little bit of that initial like, oh, I must not be reading as good of books, and having to just check that because length of book says nothing about the quality of book or the quality of the reader, which, if I look at my reads, I've had some really good like 5-star reads that have made me think, books that I've really enjoyed, even though they've been shorter. So it's just interesting, the initial thoughts that come to mind sometimes, and yeah, then the second and third thoughts as I think through what I just thought. So of my 11 books, 5 of them were a hard copy, 5 were audiobooks, and 1 was a hard copy and audiobook combo. 8 of my books were from the library or Libby, 2 I purchased, and 1 was a gift. 1 was nonfiction and 10 were fiction. So once again, a very fiction-heavy month. My cat is using the litter box. And I don't know if the audio on my phone can pick that up. And in the month of April, utilizing my library and counting in the book I was gifted, I saved a total of about $115.75. I also been wanting to start tracking the publication date of the books that I read, and I thought for sure that Goodreads used to track that. I know they've updated their website, so I don't know if I'm just missing it now or if they no longer track that, but I would like to start tracking that. So in April, 5 of the books that I read were published in 2025, which also was quite interesting to me because I feel like over the last few years, I've started reading more and more new releases, which is kind of fun because for the longest time, I didn't read new releases. I only read much older books, and I love that too. But it's just interesting that in April, 5, almost half of my books were published in 2025. 1 was published in 2024, 1 in 2021, 1 in 2019, 1 in 2018, and 1 in 2015. So all of them were within the last 10 years, which is so funny because I was like, oh, 2015, they're all recent books. And then when I stop and realize that was 10 years ago, that's wild. It's been a few years since I tracked the authors of the books that I read, just in a way of making sure that I'm reading widely and just making sure that I'm reading from different perspectives. So thanks to Ellen's Diversity Book Bingo, I am going to try to get back into that this year. So far, all I prepped for this wrap-up video is just finding all the authors and where they are from. One of the challenges for Ellen's Diversity Book Bingo is to read books that are set in different continents, particularly reading from countries that we do not tend to gravitate towards or that we have not read before. So I'm glad for Ellen's Bingo and the push to get back into tracking some of these things and making sure that my reading is intentionally aligned with my desire to read intentionally. I just said intentionally twice. Over the last 6-8 months or so, I have started using the Storygraph app, but mostly just to get basic data. So I'm hoping to start utilizing Storygraph more. Normally, I just put in a book on Goodreads and Storygraph. I'll just put in a book when I finish it, so it's not tracking how long it takes me to read or whatnot, but I really like that Storygraph does do that. So I'm going to try to start getting better about entering a book onto Storygraph when I start reading it so that I can track the average length of time it takes me to read and some of those fun facts. And also so it can start tracking my average star ratings. Okay, some of my highlights for the month of April. The first one I want to highlight is Gods of Jade and Shadow by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. This was a book club pick for one of my new book clubs. My best friend started a book club with me and one of her friends, so it's a small club, and we meet virtually, which is really nice. This was the first pick for this book club, and we ended up kind of voting anonymously on a bunch of books, and this was the top pick from that vote. Gods of Jade and Shadow was published in 2019, and this is one of the books that I did as a hard copy and audiobook. I really liked the audiobook. I thought it gave the story a lot of life and character, and it was just really fun to hear this one. You know, sometimes there are just some narrators that really just do a great job, and it felt like I was in the story when I was listening to it. So I really liked the audiobook experience. When the story opens, the main character, Cassiopeia, is working for her grandfather. Circumstances are not great. She is doing backbreaking labor for a family that does not like her or care about her. Her cousin bullies her relentlessly, and she and her mom are basically stuck just trying to serve and care for the grandfather. And Cassiopeia just wants to escape. She wants to get away. One day, when she is doing some of her responsibilities that are imposed upon her, she goes into her grandfather's room and finds a wooden box. And this is all on the blurb, so it's not a spoiler. But when she opens the box, she releases the spirit of the god of death. And through a series of events, she basically ends up compelled to help him find his brother and reclaim his throne. So the two of them start out on this journey and adventure, I guess you could say, to try to stay alive and find his brother. When we had our book club discussion on this, it was quite interesting because all three of us said that there were varying parts that we did not necessarily enjoy. We all were hooked, but not quite, but we all loved the theme and the story, if that makes sense. It was very complicated, but it was very interesting that we all three kind of took away some of the same vibes from the story. If I was going to give it a star rating or a bookmark rating for my channel, it would have changed depending on which part of the story you asked me what my rating was. And I still haven't quite landed for sure on what my rating would be. The beginning of it really hooked me. I was drawn in, I was so curious, I was really interested. The middle got a little murky, and then at the end there were so many great quotes and themes and things to think about, and both of my friends in the book club were sharing some quotes that they had saved from the book. It was really good, but the middle was quite murky. So I'm really glad that I read this because this was not, I'll be honest, this was not my top vote when we voted for the read. I did not think necessarily that it would be something that I would enjoy, but I think that's one of the really neat things about book clubs is reading things that we may not necessarily gravitate to on our own. And I ended up enjoying this, and it made me think a lot. There were definitely themes of family and finding yourself, being true to yourself. I loved the way that it talked about death because this Mayan god is the god of death, and that was fascinating to me, the way that they talked about death and some of the themes there. And I loved aspects of the story between her and her cousin, Martine. So it was a good book. I would recommend it. It's not like it's going to be one of my top reads for the year, but I really enjoyed it. And a book that makes me think and that impacts me, even if my bookmark rating isn't super high, is still a good book, I would say. The next book I want to highlight is Beautiful Ugly by Alice Feeney. I used to read a lot of thrillers. It was one of my top genres. And again, just with the natural ebb and flow, and I'm a mood reader, so I had started reading a lot more romance, which I still like romance, but I was really feeling like, honestly, since the beginning of this year, but especially in April, I was like, I don't want to read another romance. I need to read something else. So this was the first thriller I feel like that I had picked up in a while, or at least, now I have to think back on the books that I've read the last few months. It was at least one of the first thrillers to kind of get me out of the romance sector I had been in, and I really liked this one. I had read a few other Alice Feeney books and was not a huge fan. I think this is definitely my favorite one. Well, one of my favorites. I really did like Rock, Paper, Scissors. That's one of the first thrillers I ever read, if I remember correctly. So I think this might be my second favorite by her. Beautiful Ugly was published in 2025 in January, so it is a new release. And the book description grabbed me because it is about an author, and I love that. The story opens with author Grady Green, and he is waiting for a phone call that could bring really good news for the latest book that he wrote. His wife is not there, she's on her way home from work, and he has some feelings about that. He's, really wishing that she could be there because she knew how important this was to him, and yet she did not make it a priority to come home to experience this with him, to wait for this phone call and find out this good news. And then he gets a phone call from his wife as she is driving home. On this phone call, they start to catch up, and then she says something along the lines of, there's a car, there's someone in the middle of the road, I need to stop, I need to make sure everything's okay. And Grady's like, no, don't stop. It's dark, it's the middle of the night, like, don't stop. Like, stay in the car, make sure you're safe. And she says, no, like, I can't leave this person. I need to get out and make sure everything's okay. She sets her phone down, but doesn't hang up. And he can hear on the other end, he can hear the car door close. And then he hears nothing except for a few minutes later, some muffled breathing. He goes out to try to find her, and he finds the car abandoned by the side of the cliff, and his wife is gone. So fast forward a year. Most of the book takes place a year after that. He has been struggling as a writer, and he's just kind of needing some new inspiration. His book publisher, who was personal friends with his wife, has an idea to send him to this Scottish island. This island is very small. If I remember correctly, there were 25 people who lived on the island, and one of the previous people who lived there was an author. He had passed away and left his house to this publisher. So the publisher gives the key to Grady, and Grady takes off to this Scottish island in the hopes of resting, being able to refresh his creativity, and try to figure out how to write this new book that he needs to give to his publisher. Before he even reaches the island, strange things keep happening. And from here, I can't really say too much without giving spoilers. Thus is the nature of thrillers. I was so hooked on this one. I was so curious. I wanted to know more. I had my theories. One of the reasons I love thrillers is because I love developing my theories, and I think it's going to be this, or it's this person, or this is what this means. And I love when I'm right, and I also love when I'm wrong, because it's so fun to just have your mind shocked because you did not see something coming. This book was a little mix of both, I would say. I still did not call most of the main twists. Had quite the array of emotions at the end. It was really good, but then it was really not good. But then I didn't know what I thought. And then it was really intriguing. So, yes. I can't say too much more about my specific thoughts because obviously I don't want to give away the ending, but this book helped bring me back to my love of thrillers and just confirms that I really want to start reading more thrillers again. I'm still a mood reader, so I'm still going to be reading, an array, I assume, but I enjoyed this one. Ironically enough, the next book I'm going to highlight is a romance, and that is 8 Perfect Hours by Leah Lewis. This is the book that I unwrapped from my physical TBR, and at first, I was a little annoyed because I did not want to read more romance, but this one I really did like. 8 Perfect Hours was published in 2021, and it's the first book that I have read by this author, but I am curious to read more by her, maybe down the road when I'm ready to be picking up more romances. 8 Perfect Hours follow the story of Noelle Butterby, who is in her 30s, and when it opens, she is leaving an event at her old college, and she is stuck on the highway with a snowstorm. Roads are closed, and there's just cars stuck on the highway with nowhere to go. They just have to wait it out. Unfortunately, her phone is dead, and she can't contact her family. There's a knock on her window, and she looks over to see someone who we find out is named Sam, who is in the car next to her and sees that she's having trouble with her phone, and he asks if she would like to sit in his car to charge her phone. She does decide to get in his car and charge her phone. They end up talking. They spend 8 hours together, 8 perfect hours, as the title suggests, in his car, and just talking, and conversation flows, and he seems really nice. They develop inside jokes. She's never felt a connection like this. She had previously been in a relationship with someone for a number of years, and as the story goes on, the ex ends up coming back into her life, and they had really good memories together, and she had a connection with him, but was it enough of a connection where they really knew each other? So I really liked those aspects as she was trying to decide what she wanted and what does a healthy relationship look like, and even if something is comfortable, and even if something is okay and they have good times together, is that what she wants in a relationship? Especially when compared with Sam. The problem with Sam is he is American and she lives in England. As fate would have it, their paths continue to cross a couple more times, which is so surprising since they live in separate countries. So I thought this was a fun read. I liked that it was still a light read and an easy read, but it still had a lot of real themes. It didn't feel like it felt like there were elements of real life. I thought this was a fun and interesting romance. And the last book I want to highlight is Listen for the Lie by Amy Tintera. This book I had heard so many good things about, and one of my good friends told me to listen to the audio, that the audiobook was worth it. So I was in line, I think when I started in line on Libby, I was number 500 and something, so it took a bit of time, but I am glad that I waited for the audiobook. The main character of this story is Lucy. And at the beginning, we are picking up on the fact that she lives in LA and she created a new life for herself. She gets a call from her mom or her grandmother and asking her to come home for grandmother's birthday. I love how after I finish a book, details become murky. But yes, the grandmother's birthday. And at first, she does not want to go back because she does not want to go back to the small town that she came from. But it's for the birthday. She decides to go back. And we start to pick up more pieces of her story. Years ago, her best friend, Savvy, was killed, and Lucy was found covered in her best friend's blood, and yet claiming she did not kill her. There was no evidence to show that she did. However, the whole town is very suspicious of her, which is why she moved to LA and started a new life for herself. So now she's back, and when she gets back to town, she discovers that a big true crime podcaster is also in town trying to piece together what happened. This is why the audiobook is worth it, because the podcast elements reads like a podcast when you're listening to it. And it's just a fun way of feeling more immersed in the story and as if you're really listening to the podcast episodes or the interviews or all of these things. So it is a good audiobook. Lucy has very few memories of that night, and everyone has been trying for years to get her to remember, and she just can't. Which of course does not help her case, because how convenient is it that she just casually can't remember what happened the night her best friend died? When the podcast host seems to be on her side and trying to actually hear from her, Lucy has to decide, is he telling the truth? Is he trustworthy? She had never wanted to really try to investigate, but maybe it's time to start trying to figure out what happened that night. So I did really enjoy this book. I did really enjoy the audiobook, and I would recommend the audio version. So there are my April highlights. I am going to start trying something different, I think, at least for this month. We'll see how it goes. And normally I put my TBR for the next month at the end of my wrap-up videos. I'm gonna try making a separate video. So we will see how this goes, if this lasts, but for now, that's what I'm feeling. So that should be my next video on my channel. Please let me know in the comments, what was your top read in April? And let me know if you've read any of these 4 books. I would love to hear your thoughts on them as well. Until next time, happy reading.